Hi, I'm Tony,
I'm Patrick.
and we'd like to welcome you to Cave to the Cross Apologetics. We are working our way through Mitch Stokes' books. His book is entitled How to Be an Atheist, and we are on chapter 16. We've had a break in chapter 16 because it's a pretty long chapter, pretty detailed chapter, pretty rigorous in terms of the argument that he's trying to make.
Yeah, we want to digest it and understand kind of where he's come from and where he's going. And again, give it until the next chapter if you're disagreeing. But he'll start to kind of you'll kind of see where he's going with a lot of this stuff too.
Yeah, and so the basic idea in this chapter, in fact, the title of it is Morality is Personal, right? Now, generally, we don't think about that because if it's personal, then
As Christians.
As Christians. If it's personal, then it doesn't seem to be objective. That is, exist independent of people, right? Yeah. It is dependent on people. And of course, we don't want morality to be like that because then anybody can say anything is morally right or wrong, right? If it's personal. But he suggests you need a valuer in order to have values. And so if we have moral values, then you need a person, right, who values various moral statements and positions and that sort of thing. So morality is personal is what he suggested. And he suggests that this is all that naturalism can give us because, we're the only things that are persons that exist, right? Now, he's going to argue that, if God exists,
right,
then God is the person that is the ultimate value, right? We haven't quite got there yet. Right?
Spoiled the ending. Yeah. Is a small v as in people are the value, or is there a big V where there's some ultimate value?
Yeah, right. So in this section here, we've just finished working through a bit of this particular chapter. In this particular section, he's asking the question about, is it nature or nurture that determines what's going on here?
Great. I'm glad he finally figured this out because there's a lot of people that are going to stop writing books after this.
Yeah. So he says, neither moral nor prudential oughts are categorical. That's what he's been arguing. Right. By categorical, he means, that they are absolutely true. You should or ought to do this, period, right? He says, no, they're hypothetical, right? They're conditional. If you desire or want or whatever, then you do this particular thing, right? So that's what he's been arguing here, especially if naturalism is true, right?
Right.
He says, no doubt moral oughts then feel different from these, prudential oughts. They feel different than the hypothetical oughts. We feel like, well, no, you just have to do it, right? It feels categorical. But he says it's not obvious that there's anything objective beyond the feelings themselves, right? And this is kind of what Hume was arguing, right? It's our feelings are the only thing that we have, right?
Yeah, and we can measure them, and there's issues with that, and we've covered that before.
Right. Or at least if naturalism is true, right?
If naturalism is true. That's the big caveat here.
Yeah, yes. Right? So thinking that moral imperatives are categorical and therefore more objective than prudential oughts is not necessarily the case. He suggests here that Philippe Foot argued that, are we then to say that there's nothing behind the idea that moral judgments are categorical imperatives, but the relative stringency of our moral teaching, right? How hard we teach it, how tough we are in terms of you better do the right thing, right? He says it would seem, according to her, that there seems to be little behind the sentiments conditioned by our ethical upbringing, right? In other words, it's the social, it's the nurturing that allows for us to have these moral sentiments, right?
Yeah, you're going through life and you're looking at some teenage kids and you see their behavior and you go, man, that parent should have spanked those kids way more than because you're measuring their moral upbringing by what you in that society believe that they should be doing.
Right. And so moral upbringing and societal pressure then are crucial to forming our moral sentiments. That's the nature or nurture part of it. And when done correctly, this is an excellent thing. In any case, it's unavoidable. But morality is more, he thinks, than just nurture. Nature plays a role too. All right. Many theists will think that God has designed us with a moral faculty that produces strong moral sentiments. Other people will think, no, it's evolution that did it. Right? So we have God or evolution, right? He says, in his view, the moral imperatives are conditional is essentially in agreement with Mackey, which is that moral ought does not have any essential different meaning or sense from other oughts. Right? An ought is an ought is an ought, he's suggesting, so far as ethic is concerned. So Mackey says, my thesis is there are no objective values. There are no objective values. It's specifically the denial that any such categorical imperative element is objectively valid. So there is no categorical, there is no absolute, is what Mackey is trying to argue here. And he says he mentions Mackey because he's famous for being one of the few atheists who is also a moral skeptic or nihilist.
Hey,
right?
he's a sober skeptic. He's taking his skepticism seriously.
That's right. That's right. Right. And so that's why he mentions that nihil. So he says this is because this seems to be really extreme, right?
Sure.
And so folks, push against this, right?
Which is one of the reasons why Harris came up with his well-being theory, is
Right.
because he wants to ground it in an ethical framework. But as we'll see in a little bit, there might be some implications to that. So, so then, even if the standards of morality are based on what we value, this, Dr. Stokes says, doesn't mean that there isn't anything objective about morality. There can be an objective fact of the matter about whether something meets a moral standard, even if the standard is itself is subjective.
So maybe we can sneak objectivity into it, right?
And so he has I think a really sharp example here. So the question is, what makes a good knife? Well, a good knife, as we all know, is that it's sharp. Okay, well, there might be butter knives and steak knives and serrated knives, and so there might be types of knives. But when we come to think of knife forms, we kind of think of sharpness as being an objective standard for determining whether or not a knife is good. And so we talk about the knife's sharpness. We believe that there's objective sharpness. When we're valuing sharpness is, though, subjective. So, we can kind of measure the edge. We can measure, how it slices through butter and dices julienne fries, and we can run it through all the tests. For those of you who don't even watch commercials anymore, because I don't think they even make them, you always had the Ginsu knives that
slice and dice
would cut a tin can, but then be able to go right through the tomato like it was nothing. The infomercials were great back then, and so then it would seem there is indeed evaluating objectivity despite the subjectivity of the value itself. That there's normative facts about whether something meets a standard.
Right. So the standard is sharpness, and we can have an objective fact. Then how sharp is the knife, or that sort of thing. That is the standard, and it seems like now we have objectivity, right? We can say, does the knife meet this particular objective standard that we have of sharpness?
Yeah. So let's kind of apply this to a person. So you're in the military, and your job is to take out the enemy. And so you go and you say, I go out into the middle of the battlefield. I yell really loud. I tell the enemy, "Hey, we're both human beings. We're fighting over the same dirt. This seems illogical," and you get the other side to put down their arms.
That's right.
You are a good soldier. Well, no, because the people who have grouped you into this unit want you to go out and kill the other side. And so you are being a objectively terrible soldier at that point in time. You may get the job done, but you're not doing it in the same fashion as what they want. So you're a bad soldier. Now, someone who's a marksman that can get 10 out of 10 on the bullseye and take out the enemy that way, that is what the valuer, the high up in command, want. And so you might be a good diplomat, but you need to not be a good soldier in that regard.
So it is objective. Well, he's going to say no, right?
Right. It's again this attempt to find in a subjective universe an objective standard, like well-being was attempted to measure the EKG of the same stuff, and so again we still had some issues with that. So the standard itself is not objective.
Yeah, and that's the issue, right?
Right.
What we measure may be, and how we measure may be objective, but where does the standard come from?
Right.
The standard is subjective. We determine the standard.
Right.
So we haven't got our objective value here. We determine the standard.
Right. And you know, we see that today with half the country thinking the founding fathers were good. Well, okay, but the other half think they were bad because they owned slaves or were rich men who wanted to keep more of their money, or you know, they rebelled against the sovereign, and so you know, again, the good or the bad again, those aren't from nature that we're pulling out. It's by what criteria are we judging that good man? Right. The good man is one who overthrows the government in order to bring about the United States of America as it currently is, so that I can then question them, or is it bad for George Washington owned slaves, but yet fight for the freedom of men to be free? And so again, we're having to make sure that our terms aren't crossed with our old way of thinking from the pre-Enlightenment age, where there was a lawgiver.
And so the choice of the standard, he suggests, depends on the function of the thing that we're looking at.
Right. So with a knife is good if it is sharp. So humans declare that a knife ought to be sharp because we value sharp knives in more contexts. Our choice for that standard for a good knife depends on the knife's intended function. What was that knife for? So again, going back to, if you're a butter knife, you don't need to be sharp, but for all things being equal, knives should be sharp. Right. So remember, we're ultimately looking for the source of moral standards themselves. And this is Dr. Stokes saying, and if I'm right, that source is our values, desires, and preferences. Oh man, this seems like presuppositional. To put it differently, we're the source, at least if naturalism is true. Yeah. If, on the other hand, theism is true, then the standards depend on God's values, as we'll see. And again, I don't want to get too much into this because, again, next chapter. I swear the answers are next chapter. But he's still going based on this premise of values being subjective and God being the ultimate one who can declare these subjective values as being the greatest being, because he's the lawgiver, he's the maker, he's, you know, all these things. He's the one who knows best. He sits from on high and can tell us what's best for his purposes and plan, and so he declares what's good and bad. And again, we'll get into Euthyphro's dilemma and all that stuff too in the next chapter.
Yeah, so the next question he asked, okay, the function of the knife, we determine that sharpness is what we want, so it's subjective, right?
Right.
And it's based in on how the function of the knife is. So the next question then is, okay, well, what makes a person good? We know what makes a knife good, right?
If they're sharp.
Yeah.
They have a biting tongue.
That's right.
Or if their minds are really smart and they can come up with the answer fast.
Right. He says, now we're in a position to consider what makes a person good. Whether something is good or bad, we so often depends on the function, right, or purpose of the thing. He says, so what makes someone good as a person? Well, a good person would be, it seems, someone who adequately performs the function of a person, who successfully fulfills the role of a human being, right? So that's what makes a person good. So if you function as a person and you do, you know, you're the right kind of being in terms of what the function of a person is, then you're a good one, right? If you don't, I guess you're a bad one, right? That kind of stuff, right? So notice he says, but what's the function of a person in general, right? What is that, right? Whereas we know the function, for instance, of a doctor or an accountant, he says it's not clear what a human is for.
And there's a lot of people that still ask, what am I here for?
That's right.
Yeah.
And so, of course, this assumes that humans have a function, right? And that they're for something, that they have some type of end or purpose or goal or that sort of thing, right? But here's the problem. He says, with the rise of modern science, this end goal purpose that people may have had or earlier, before the rise of modern science, for instance, Aristotle believed that people had. But with the rise of modern science, he says, we've lost that, right? There is no purpose, goal, end for people. And so, what do we do here, right? Of course, according to theists, we do, right? Humans still have a purpose. But as Christianity declined and naturalism became more prevalent, it became, because commonplace for humans to view as simply a collection of inert matter, then we lost our purpose, our goal, our function.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
We lost it.
We're glorious stardust, and unfortunately, that stardust just doesn't have anything to do in this universe. But
Right.
it's really beautiful to think about, and we put an echoey Carl Sagan in the background and show pictures of stars, and we say we're them and they're us.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah,
Now I'm
yeah.
going to be a good serial killer
That's right.
because I can be, right?
Or a good star. Yeah. So if naturalism is true, he says, what is humans for? Well, who says? It's what, it would appear that humans don't have an objective that is human independent function. That is, it's reasonable to think that a function or purpose requires a mind, a consciousness that has intentions. And so an end or a goal, that sort of thing seems to require a mind, right? And, so for example, he says we can determine what a watch is good for by appealing to the intentions, goal, and purposes of the watch's designer, right? If naturalism is true, though, there is no purpose outside the subjective purposes that humans choose for themselves. That's it, right? And these purposes or goal will vary from person to person. So each one can choose whatever they want, And so if you want to be a serial killer, if that's your function and purpose, that's your function and purpose.
Right. I give the police something to do. I'm here creating jobs. What are you doing, huh? Yeah.
So he says then morality, moral value ultimately requires a person who does a valuing, and what makes a good person is whatever we say makes a good person. Right? That's the bottom line. And of course, is that what we really want? Right? Is that what we want out of morality? Whatever we say.
Yeah.
Right?
That seems pretty dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least for the rest of us. So we first began the discussion. We saw that the scientific revolution raised three problems for our traditional view of morality. One problem was that Hume, our good friend David Hume, applied the experimental method to the study of ethics. All he could find, morally speaking, was our ethical institutions or sentiments. A second problem was that science made it seem that the divine command theory of morality had little going for it, didn't offer us anything new.
And the divine theory suggests that God tells us he's the lawgiver and he gives us the law. So whatever God says, that is what we ought to do, or whatever he prohibits, we shouldn't do that.
Right.
Right.
And so the third problem, which we're not going to really cover that much, but it does need to be said because Harris does talk about it, and I think it's right to talk about it. It's just this book. I mean, we did a whole interview with Scott Christensen about this subject, so you can refer to the episode on that if you want more. So the third problem is whether we're free to choose to do what is right or wrong.
Freedom.
Things.
Yeah.
Freedom is a dangerous thing. Much less choose our values that underwrite our morality. So are we free to choose, and are we free to do what is right or wrong within those things? So this assumes, we usually assume that ought implies can. To perform some immoral act, for example, is to be blameworthy or culpable, and this idea of culpability depends on our notion of free will, right? So someone runs over a pedestrian with their car, they're brought before the judge. The judge says, were you having a heart attack? Were you, did you believe that this person was attacking somebody else? No. I was intoxicated and I ran over this person. Okay, well, you are culpable because you could have done differently, or
so you're to blame,
or you knew better, and so it wasn't you were forced to with a gun at your head, or you weren't commanded to by some supernatural being. You did it because of your actions that you could have chose differently. I think that's the standard reply. Now, if naturalism is true, however, and it implied that we have no free will, then our notions of morality would certainly be drastically impacted. So again, if naturalism is true, it seems like you and I are nature, and that's all that there is. This mind concept seems to just be chemicals firing off at different capacities. We exhibit personality based off our synaptic inputs plus our collective memories, because your personality is dependent upon past experiences that build you to the self that you are. And your chemicals firing, and you hope that they're firing in a correct way, but you don't know.
Right. So the various laws of nature
Yeah.
are controlling
Right.
everything, right? Given the initial conditions and how the laws of nature operate,
Right.
we are not free. That's just what we
Yeah,
have to
yeah,
do.
we're-
The laws of nature dictate that.
That,
right?
that cue ball hit the first ball that knocked us all around, and we're just following the path that the cue ball, the Big Bang started. And
If
we're-
naturalism is true.
right, I'm sorry that I sunk the 8 ball before I was supposed to, but it's the only thing that I could do because the universe is just in motion now. So that seems to be a big issue. And so we're not going to spend too much time, but that is a problem. And how does kind of the Sam Harris view it? Well, Sam Harris seems to be kind of the one person who says that we don't have the ability to choose, and that we're not free, and that we're all kind of determined in the sense. Now, it seems odd because he, writes books and has podcasts, and he tries to convince people, and it doesn't seem like he is exactly following this. But at the same time, if he's determined to do so, he's doing exactly what he's determined to do so.
If he wasn't free to say it, then how does he know it's true?
Right.
That's the issue,
Right.
right? I mean, he's saying that free will is an illusion. Okay, fine. How do you? If you're not free to say that, then how do you know what you're saying is true?
Right. And so he takes a kind of a prudential form for this and says, if the scientific community were to declare free will an illusion, it would participate a culture war far more belligerent than the ones that have been waged on the subject of evolution.
So they hide it and they don't tell anybody?
Well, they don't value the truth over, the culture. And so they're just doing what may be right in their own eyes. So many unbelieving scientists realize this and so shy away from openly embracing determinism. And who could blame them, again, if determinism is true? But Harris is one of the few unbelievers bold enough to kind of be out there and about it. Again, if determinism is true, there's nothing that we can do. So if we all find out about it, then what happens? What will be, right? It's that age-old adage. And so that is an issue with if naturalism is true. And so again, there are responses to that, and I would suggest going back to Scott Christensen's interview and then also picking up his book, because he also talks about does Christianity, the fact that God is sovereign in some way, and especially from a reform perspective, does that mean we're also completely determined? Well, no, not exactly. So we'll kind of leave it there, but he says that he agrees with Harrison Roseberg that science plus naturalism gives us good reason to think that we're not free. Oh, and I almost agree that most naturalists should believe likewise. They should approach the topic of freedom with sober skepticism. And, that's true. And it seems like people that don't want to either don't like the conclusions to it or don't like the implications of it. And so that's where he's coming from. So again, unfortunately, what your presuppositions are leads you to conclusions, and what he's saying throughout this book is that there are conclusions that atheists come to that they don't seem to like the conclusion of, and so.
But if they're sober skeptics, they should come to those various conclusions.
Right. Yeah.
Even whether they like it or not.
Yeah. Follow your science and logic down that you put your faith in, and that'll lead you to wherever you go, and there you be. And so next, Dr. Stokes wants to talk about his perspective on that. So he does view, again, he does say that there needs to be a valuer to instill values, and for some odd reason, he doesn't think humans do a good enough job with it. And so we'll figure out what his view might be, and that there might be a single valuer that controls the universe and has created us and has the ability to command things and value things in certain perspectives. So that's where we're at. Again, what do you think about this? Let us know. Are there questions that you have about this that maybe as we get towards the end that you have that you want us to kind of answer? Shoot us an email, put them in the comments. We'll collect them, and maybe kind of to sum up this book, once we do kind of our final breakdown of it, we'll hit some of the issues that you might have. And so feel free to drop that in kind of whatever social media or area that you're viewing this or listening to this, and we'd be happy to to try and help. Might not have the right answers, but we're all philosophers here, and so we can talk until the tape runs out and say nothing. So again, thank you.
Everybody's a philosopher, whether they know it or not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We can all talk nonsense until the other person stops listening. But we thank you for listening, and we hope to see you back for the final few chapters. And we thank you for joining us so far. So,
all right, see you next time.
Yep.